I was talking with Mike this morning about a problem that he had with his Pathfinder, his car, and he said that there was a period of time where, well, I guess this is part of a problem with the particular year of this model, where there's the transmission fluid and the radiator fluid actually end up mixing, and then it goes into the transmission. And the transmission has to be replaced as a result of this. So bad malfunction, right? And it reminded me of this time when my dad said that I could take his truck to go fishing, and he just asked me to put motor oil in it before I went. And so I popped the hood, and for whatever reason, it wasn't very apparent to me where the motor oil was supposed to go. And so I put it in the power steering, I think. Anyways, I was literally sucking through a tube oil out of my dad's truck like 2 hours later, because I had to siphon it out. So you can do you can make some pretty bad mistakes in ignorance. You can have good motives and make some pretty serious mistakes in your ignorance that do a lot of damage. It's kind of that thought that I want to start us with this morning as we think about what the Pharisees were doing with regards to their own Messiah. In the book of John, we're in chapter 11, and we've been walking through this gospel since the church began. And the leadership of Israel is repeatedly demonstrating themselves to be blind to what it is that they're actually doing. And of course, they're doing great damage. They're doing great damage to themselves, and yet God has a plan in all of that. We are looking at a passage today that comes right on the tail end of the resurrection of a man named Lazarus. We haven't been in the Gospel of John since Easter morning, where we looked at the resurrection of Lazarus. Actually, I don't know if you guys find this interesting, but we've actually preached more sermons in 2016 outside the Gospel of John than we have in the Gospel of John. So hopefully we'll get back into this book and just kind of continue walking through it. We want that to be the norm. We want to walk through books of the Bible chapter by chapter. It keeps us from getting too stuck on my soapboxes if we do it that way. So chapter by chapter, paragraph by paragraph, and we haven't been in John for 5 or 6 weeks now. We haven't preached a sermon on John in this new building yet. So this will be, well, I don't know that makes this morning somehow special, but we're going back to John today. That's the point. Resurrection of Lazarus. You may remember this guy Lazarus, he's a friend of Jesus, and he gets sick, and he ends up dying, and then he's in the tomb for 4 days, and Jesus goes down to Bethany, the village where Lazarus lived, and in front of this incredible crowd of Jewish people who'd come out from Jerusalem, in front of this incredible crowd, Jesus raises Lazarus up from the dead. He just tells him to come out from the tomb. He comes out. He's got the bandages on. It's literally a physical resuscitation of a man from the dead. It's an incredible miracle. It's an incredible sign. In fact, of all the signs in the Gospel of John, there are 7 miracles that Jesus does that are regarded as signs by John. Of all 7 of the signs in John's Gospel, this is the most profound. This is the climactic sign in John's Gospel, because this sign points to a greater resurrection from the dead, namely Christ's own resurrection from the dead, when he's going to once and for all put an end to sin and death. He's going to put death in its grave, as we sing about sometimes. So this is the climactic sign, this raising of Lazarus, and it is effectively the straw that breaks the camel's back with regards to the Pharisees and the chief priests, the leadership of Israel, and their tolerance of Jesus, as we'll see today. John starts this section off in verses 45 and 46 by talking about 2 different responses to the resurrection of Lazarus. One response in verse 45, a response of faith. And then there's another response in verse 46, a response of unbelief. Look at this. If you've got your Bibles, look at John 11:45. It reads like this: Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did when he raised Lazarus from the dead, believed in him. Many of the Jews believed in him. That's one of the responses, that's one of the things that happened when Jesus rose this guy up from the dead. Many people believed in him, meaning many people believed that Jesus is the Messiah, that he is in fact the long-awaited deliverer, the promised king that was to come. This sign created belief that Jesus is the Messiah. And it also created another response in verse 46. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. They tattled on him. Right? They reported to the Pharisees. Some people believed and some people reported him to the authorities. And that was a trigger. It sets in motion the rest of the paragraph. In verse 47, the Sanhedrin gathers. There's a gathering of the high leadership, the highest leadership council in the nation gathers as a result of this report. And the conclusion of this council, they have a meeting, and the conclusion of their meeting is in verse 53. Look at it. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Okay, so Jesus has not had a trial, but he has been sentenced at this point by the highest powers in Israel. He's a dead man walking. And therefore, verse 54, Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, which is about 12 miles away from Jerusalem. Okay, and if you're on foot, that gives you a little bit of distance from the hornet's nest, but he's still pretty close, and he stayed there with the disciples. So Jesus has to go into hiding as a result of this decision that has been made by the council. And now he won't come out of hiding until he emerges at the Passover, where he will sacrifice his life. So it's pretty noteworthy, I think, that John's main follow-up, in fact, really, John's only follow-up to the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead. I mean, if you're John, and you tell this story about this guy Lazarus who raises from the dead, what details would you tell right here? So Jesus raises him from the dead, and then it's like, what did he see? Lazarus, what did you see? I mean, were you even conscious? What did you, were you in heaven? Or was it just kind of like sleeping? Or what was it like? The only follow-up that John gives us to this most climactic sign is that it results in belief for some, unbelief in others, which triggers a plot to have the Son of God murdered. It's a hinge point in the Gospel of John. This sign, the reason John puts this in the Gospel of John is so that you know after this, his death was imminent. It was on its way. So what was the deal with this sign? Well, why did it create such anger and such hatred among the leadership of Israel? That's what we're going to look at right now as we go to this meeting of the Sanhedrin in verses 47 to 52. Let me give you a little background about the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was overseen by the high priest, whose name was Joseph Caiaphas. And Caiaphas was the high priest, and underneath him, the council consisted of what they called chief priests. The chief priests were mainly composed of relatives of Joseph Caiaphas. And they were mostly what we would call, or what they called, Sadducees. They were of a particular theological belief, the Sadducees. The chief priests were mostly Sadducees, And then the rest of the council was made up of a small minority of the Pharisees. Okay, so the high priest over the council consisting of chief priests and Pharisees, who were the scribes. The Sanhedrin, that council, was in charge of all the internal affairs of Israel. Rome was really the one in charge. Rome had conquered the Palestinian territory, and so Rome was truly in charge. But under Rome, the Sanhedrin was the most powerful body of leaders in all of Israel. They had charge of all the internal affairs of Israel. It was the equivalent of the executive and the judicial and the legislative branches in our government, all packed into one council of about 70 men. This was a meeting of the highest order in Israel, and they have gathered to determine what they're going to do with this miracle worker. Like, this is a really big deal. And they are under the impression that their counsel is there resting upon and they're to administrate God's theocratic rule over the land of Israel. Okay? It's a really big meeting that's taking place here, at least in terms of the importance. And the meeting begins with a question in verse 47, because these guys are perplexed. They don't know what to do with this guy. So they ask this question, verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Okay, so they're perplexed, and there's basically three steps to this question that they have, the problem that they're facing. Number one, Jesus is doing many signs. And because he's doing many signs, number two, they're afraid that people will believe in him. And if people believe in Jesus as the Messiah, what's going to happen? The King is here. Our long-awaited deliverer is here. And it will stir up a messianic hope and probably stir up some sort of uprising and a revolt. He's doing many signs. People are going to believe in him. And then Rome will crush us. They'll take away our place, a reference to the temple, and they'll take away our nation, our national existence. Now think about this. These guys are the men who are entrusted with the leadership of Israel. This is their God-appointed responsibility to oversee this nation. And their history is a long trail of suffering under foreign dominion. In 587 BC, the Babylonians came in and they destroyed the temple and sent all the nobility out to the nations. They scattered them. And then the Persians conquered the Babylonians. So the book of Esther is a story of Israel living in exile under the rule of the Persians. And then after that, Alexander conquered the land of Palestine in 323 BC. And then after that, the Ptolemies were in charge. And then after that, the Syrians were in charge. And their leader, Epiphanes, went into the temple and sacrificed a pig. And then after that, the Roman Emperor Pompey conquered the Palestinian territory. And he went into the Holy of Holies and he lived. You see, the leadership is very aware that there is this trail behind them in their history littered with foreign domination and the defiling of the temple and the destruction of the temple and the destruction of this nation. And so, if Jesus is allowed to continue performing these signs, people are going to believe in him. And if people believe in him, they will revolt. And if they revolt, Rome will crush us just like everybody else has been crushing us. We cannot let this continue. You see what they're dealing with? You see that this is the rationale of the leadership of Israel. They're trying to keep peace with Rome and break this deadly cycle, and that's why this is the last straw for them, because this was an incredible miracle. And they don't believe that he's the Messiah. So they're not going to risk being crushed by Rome for a guy they don't believe in. See, that's the situation, that's how the leaders are processing this very deadly situation for the nation. So what do we do? That's their question. What do we do? They're perplexed. What do we do with this guy? And the question is answered by the high priest, Caiaphas. He has an answer. And he says in verse 49, "But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish.'" So Caiaphas, who's apparently a pretty grumpy dude, actually it's funny, the historian Josephus talks about the Sadducees, and he says they were jerks. They were mean. Like, I think what you're seeing here, John is just drawing out for us here that Caiaphas was kind of a prick. That you know nothing at all. All right. Here's the solution to this problem, guys. Destroy Jesus rather than allowing him to provoke Rome, who will then in turn destroy us. You see, we need to have this one guy die instead of allowing him to create death for the whole nation. We need to sacrifice this guy, and in the mind of Caiaphas, it's a political move. And it's probably like pretty easy to see why that would be a good political move. Keep peace with Rome and rescue the nation from a military and from a geopolitical disaster. And in verse 53, we read that the council saw the surface level wisdom of that suggestion, and they're all in. And so, verse 53, from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. We have to kill him. We can't afford to let this continue. Now, as wicked as that is, because of course we're dealing with the Son of God here, as wicked as that is, John tells us that God is up to something else. That God is going to use the wicked plot for a good that is not intended at all by the council. And though Caiaphas intends to use this for creating political peace, God is going to use the death of Jesus for a sacrifice at a much larger level, at an eternal level. And Caiaphas, therefore, as the high priest, even as he talks about sacrificing Jesus, he unknowingly is prophesying and declaring the gospel. This is crazy. He's speaking politically, and he says, it is better for you that one man should die for the people. And John then says, well, here's the true meaning that God intended to speak through the high priest that year to Israel. Verse 51, he did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So John is like backing up, and he's saying, reader, here's how you should interpret what Caiaphas said. Listen to this at the eternal level. The death of Jesus will, in fact, preserve the life of God's people, but not at a political level. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. I mean, there's some irony in that. And Caiaphas is trying to protect the life of Israel, but Jerusalem is going to be destroyed by Rome. A revolt eventually rises up, the Jews revolt, and Rome crushes them, destroys the temple. The death of Jesus, however, does provide peace for God's people at an eternal level. Salvation for God's people at an eternal level, both for Jews and for Gentiles. God's going to use this gathering of murderous leaders in Israel to create eventually another gathering, namely the gathering in of the nations. Listen, it's interesting, not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. The gathering of God's children from all the nations, that's what this sacrifice is going to produce. Praise God, right? That's what's happening right here. This gathering right here is the fruit of the death that was plotted in this passage. The children of God gathered in. It's amazing. We're part of something right here that is being prophesied in John chapter 11. We are the fulfillment of this prophecy through the lips of Caiaphas as he was plotting to murder his own Messiah. And Caiaphas and the chief priests and the Pharisees have no idea. They have absolutely no clue about what's taking place, about what God is up to, because they don't know who Jesus really is. Like, that would change everything for them. They don't have the posture of belief. This is not the people in verse 45 who saw the resurrection of Lazarus and said, I believe in that guy. This is the fruit of the other group of people who took a posture of unbelief, and they said, they reported him to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees don't believe, and the Pharisees construct this plot because they have no clue. They have no clue who Jesus is, so they have no clue what they're doing. And I want to kind of park on that as I kind of give a concluding meditation on this passage. I want to think about the fact that these guys don't know what's going on. We, the reader, we Christians, we know that they're plotting to murder God's Son. We know that they're at war with God. We know that God's going to use this for the salvation of the nations, but they have no idea. And I want to take a minute to just recognize that they don't realize it because they've got this posture of unbelief, despite the fact that they know Jesus is doing these signs, they know His good. There are recognizable things that they ought to be able to look at and see, whoa, wait a minute, something's going on here. Despite that, they have a posture of unbelief, and that blindness has deceived them into thinking that silencing Jesus, eliminating Jesus, disposing of Jesus is actually the best thing for their people. Right? That they're actually convinced that this is the right thing. The irony in this is that even though Jesus is the Messiah, they believe that they're removing poison from the pot. And when you consider what's happening from their limited perspective, this move actually seems like the responsible thing to do. It actually seems like a noble thing to do. It actually seems maybe like the right thing to do. In fact, I would even go so far as to say, perhaps these guys are actually trying to serve God and preserve the life of God's people. You see what I'm saying? These guys, their motives might in some sense actually be noble, but their understanding is darkened, like children who want to help clean up on Christmas morning and throw all the gift cards away. Because they don't recognize the value. The Sanhedrin represents the natural posture of our world. It's a picture, it's a little illustration of the natural posture of the human heart. And it's a posture of unbelief. And the tendency of the natural human heart is to discard treasure, to reject Jesus like the Sanhedrin did. And the world will consider Christ, they will evaluate him, they will misevaluate him, and they will find that eliminating him is actually the right thing to do. The right thing to do in the mind, in the natural mind of the flesh, the right thing to do is to eliminate Jesus and his exclusivist, closed-minded claims. The right thing to do in the natural mind is to eliminate his killjoy, restrictive teachings. The right thing to do to the natural mind is to eliminate his misogynistic, old-fashioned, discriminatory designs. The right thing to do in the natural mind is to eliminate him. Eliminate him. He's not good for the people. He creates hatred. He creates division. This does not make for peace with Rome. And they do this, and we have done this, because of an inability to see and to understand the true value of his infinite glory. Just imperceptive to it. Just blind to it, not even realizing how wondrous he is. His wondrous words and his wondrous promises and his glorious teachings, they all fall dull. And he himself appears dull to the natural mind, and therefore disposable to tens of thousands of people in our city right here. Jesus appears very disposable. And when you find Jesus to be disposable, then alternative perspectives begin to look noble or wise or responsible. And the irony is that the world will abandon treasure and think that they're being responsible and wise in cleaning up the mess. And so everywhere we look, we are surrounded by people who reject Jesus and yet are engaged in a life that seems, in their own minds and in the minds of the crowd, to be noble and responsible and wise. And they might even think, the collective opinion might even be that they are serving God, when in fact they are at war with him because they are rejecting his Son. And they don't even realize it. The story of the Sanhedrin is the story of the world. They do not know what they're doing. And we shouldn't be surprised by that, because that was us, according to Ephesians chapter 2. Everyone in this room, dead in sin and trespasses, a slave to the lusts of our flesh, a servant of the spirit of the power of the air, Paul says. It was us. And our fleshly tendency goes back to that. Do not be conformed to your former passions of ignorance. We live in a war. It shouldn't surprise us that the world's like this. And our role, Christians, and this isn't in our text. I thought, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at the Sanhedrin, and what's the story? What's the story that this is telling us? Well, this is telling us a story of the world, and I find myself asking the question: well, what's our role? What's our job as we encounter people in our city who are being illustrated by this council? What's our role? What's the Christian's role? Our role is not to take that personally, to take their blindness personally and get all bent out of shape about how they're ruining our schools and they're ruining our nation and they're ruining our neighborhoods. This is not between us and them. This is a deep malfunction between creature and creator. This is a worship malfunction. And we were sent here not to have great schools and great neighborhoods and a great nation. We were sent here to help them see the value of the one that they are throwing away. We're here to help. We don't win the world with an indignant harshness to their blindness. The White House this week sent out instructions to the schools of the public schools of the United States of America regarding gender identity, and their instructions, the instructions of the Obama administration, were very poor. Very damaging, harmful instructions. Now, our God has an opinion about manhood and womanhood, and the administration is throwing it out and encouraging the teachers of our children to throw it out, to discard it. It is abominable. And if you're feeling disgust and anger about that, that's understandable. But hear me. We will not win our neighbors to Christ with the beauty of our disgust. It won't win them. We win them with treasure. We win them with treasure. Nobody ever comes to Jesus unless they find him to be desirable. You see, Jesus has to offer a compelling alternative to what the world is loving, or they'll never come. The world will never leave their loyalties unless they find something more captivating. Amy and I and some of the guys have been talking recently about this wonderful new stage of parenting called preteen and teenager. And it is an incredible time of opportunity. And Paul Tripp talks about this image of teenagers living. He said, here's the image. Okay, you've got your children, and you're wanting them to live within the boundaries of God's design. God has his good reasons for why these are his boundaries. And teens will often live in such a way that they walk up to the fence and they have their face pressed against the fence, longing for all the good stuff that's out there. You see, you with me so far? You see, that's what they love. Why can't we live that way? It looks better. They're smashed up against the fence. Okay, the win is not to build a fence that is tall enough that they can't climb out. The win is to help them see that's not the good stuff. The good stuff is within the design of our God. You see, God, the Garden of Eden was a garden full of yeses with one no. And wouldn't you know it, it was the one no that we're like, we got to have that. You see, God's way is the good way. It is more compelling. Our children, our neighbors, our co-workers must be one with the superior treasure of who Jesus is. This is a philosophy of how to think about ministry. I have to help them see the superior value of the treasure of Jesus. We win them with treasure. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found, Oh man, what a day for that dude. And he covered it up. And in his joy, in his joy, this dude just found treasure, man. And in his joy, he went and sold everything that he had so that he could buy that field. What released this guy from the enslaving power of everything he was living for? A superior treasure. It made his heart sing. And this stuff was no longer a problem because it was forks and crappy little vases, and it was like bachelor pad, it was all crap. But this, he sold all that stuff so he could have this. We win them with treasure. We have to get to the heart. We have to get to the heart. You have to care about the heart of the people of this city. You have to care about the heart of your children. You have to care about the heart of the people of the world. Because the win is not getting them to obey our rules. The win is that they see that Jesus is better. That's the win. So our assignment is to win lives to Jesus with the treasures of his gospel. And it starts, therefore, with our own hearts. Are you being one with the treasures of the gospel? Is it good to you? Is he better to you? Are you reminding yourself? Are you fueling yourself with the reminder of the superior treasure of Jesus? And we have to do that so that we find him better, so that we'll be excited to help them see there's treasure in that field. It starts with our hearts, and then it moves to them. We enter into the lives of our neighbors, and through love, and through service, and through sacrifice, and through the story of the glorious gospel of our Savior, we promote the incomparable, that's how you say that, the incomparable value of Jesus. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his glorious light. You're here to tell people about someone who is excellent and win them with treasure. Don't throw that out. That's a gift card, dude. Hey, don't throw that out. There's money on that thing. Win them with treasure. Amen?